Doug Macgregor is in some ways at the center of this story. He's a retired Army colonel who last year advised the Trump administration on foreign policy. In that capacity, he co-authored a memo calling for American troops to leave Afghanistan finally after 20 years. According to Woodward and Costa's account, that memo, Macgregor's memo, is one of the reasons that Mark Milley decided to organize a coup. Doug Macgregor joins us in studio tonight. Doug, thanks so much for coming on.
Sure.
We were talking before air, and you upsettingly did not seem shocked by this. It does seem, to people who don't know the system as well as you do, stunning that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff would be secretly calling a Chinese general and saying, we'll warn you if we're going to move against you. But knowing what you know, this does not shock you.
No, unfortunately, I'm not shocked. Keep in mind, we have yet to hear from General Milley.
Yes.
We're accepting what Bob Woodward wrote in the book
Correct.
as effectively gospel truth. And I'm not doubting Woodward's integrity, but we know from experience that from time to time, he's somewhat flexible, and the interpretation may put a spin on it that may or may not be accurate.
And I hope this is one of those cases, but Milley has not responded as of 8:07 Eastern. So the fact is that the claim is that he made this phone call to his counterpart in the Chinese military and did not tell the president. The former president has issued a statement suggesting that he did not know. So that alone, tell us, is this within bounds or is it as far out of bounds as it seems?
No, there are certain things that we know. These are the facts. First of all, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs has no statutory authority over operational forces of any kind. That means that he is not in a position to order anyone in the armed forces to say or do anything. He can't do it. He is preeminently the senior military advisor to the president. That's what he is. So in theory, before he would make such a phone call, he would discuss the subject of the phone call with the president, the commander-in-chief. He certainly would not do something without coordinating with the national security advisor and the secretary of state, because this is beyond defense. This is a foreign policy statement that he's making. These are important things to understand. The third thing, and this is...
So if that is true, if this account is correct, I mean, this is, from a layman's perspective, it sounds like a grave offense.
Yes, he's violated the law if this turns out to be true. We really need to hear from him. Congress needs to bring him over. He needs to be placed under oath, and he needs to answer questions in front of the Senate about this entire affair. It needs to be very straightforward. They then will have to determine whether or not the law has been broken. But from our standpoint, knowing what we do about who has the authority to do what and where he fits in within the broad scheme of things, this is wrong. Remember, the president is not able to act independently and launch a nuclear weapon. He has a consultative process. People who are members of a standing committee with whom this is discussed. This chain of command then runs through the Secretary of Defense and from the Secretary of Defense to Strategic Command, STRATCOM. Has nothing to do with General Milley. Now, General Milley as an advisor can speak up and suggest what they should or shouldn't do. But I think there's something else here that people need to understand. If General Milley feels as strongly as he apparently does, according to this description, about President Trump, he has at any time the right to resign his position as chairman of the Joint Chiefs and simply say, I cannot be part of this, without prejudice. That doesn't mean he has to leave the armed forces. It just means he leaves this position and someone else can be brought in to fill it. That's what you do if you feel strongly that you're dealing with someone you cannot support.
Well, Milley, I'll just make this call because it's very obvious, is a dishonorable man. We know that from his testimony before Congress. I think it's very clear. On the other hand, you know, we know for a fact that he was speaking in his capacity, I guess, as a political partisan to the leaders of the other party.
Yes, that is true.
Colluding against Trump on a political and a partisan level.
He made it very clear on numerous occasions that he was talking directly to the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and Senator Chuck Schumer, reassuring them that he, quote unquote, was in control of things in the Pentagon. There are plenty of people that saw that, including the acting Secretary of Defense. That's unfortunate.
That seems so corrupt.
Well, it seems corrupt. And again, this sort of suggests to me this is another windsock. This man blows with the wind. Clearly, the wind was moving left, and he was cultivating his bosses. That much I could accept without hesitation. It's just the entire narrative. I would like to have that examined and explored under oath in the right setting.
I got to say, maybe the most profound casualty here is the faith that people have that our system works and that their views are represented in the way the country is run. That's the most basic promise of democracy. And it seems time and again that we are learning in these details that the opinions of the people who live here and pay for it all have no bearing on anything.
Look, I think it's very clear that the American people are not represented widely in Washington, D.C. It's occupied territory. Ralph Nader used to call Washington occupied territory. It was occupied by corporations. It's occupied and controlled by donors. So the American people aren't asked very much of anything, about anything, whether it's immigration, going to war, intervening somewhere militarily. None of those things are done. So we know that that's already a huge problem. I just want to make one point very clear, though.
Yeah.
President Trump is not someone who is prepared to launch a nuclear strike out of the blue against anyone.
Right. I'm
That's
trying not
absurd
to use,
nonsense.
Right. The whole thing is BS. Yes. Actually, Trump was the first president since Jimmy Carter who didn't launch a war. So, right. Yeah. The whole thing is a lie. A lot of things are lies, we're learning. Doug McGregor, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.